All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm just going to give it a few minutes to let people join the call. I'm joined by Lee Rosenfeld from McGraw Hill today, and Neil Mendelsohn from Oracle. They've both been around, in fact, longer than me, one of them at least, which is unusual for me to be able to say. I'm looking forward to hearing from them. We've got a lovely presentation from them. Basically, our title today is McGraw Hill modernizes their ETL strategy as they migrate to the Oracle Cloud with Informatica. So we'll hear it. This is a very practical, experiential presentation, so it should be really good. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Roger Cressy. I am the principal of a company called Mindshift USA, and I have been volunteering with the AnDOUC for some time. I volunteer with a group of great people, a good bunch of people. It's become a community for me over the last number of years, and I really welcome you to it. I see we've got a pretty decent amount of people who've joined the call, so let's make a start. If we could go to the next slide, Neil, you're driving, aren't you? There are still some people coming in, but we'll make a quick start. So, first of all, please do go and look at the website, andouc.org/techcasts. You'll find an archive of all our past presentations. There's a lot of really interesting and useful technical discussions that have happened in those. Have a look at what's coming up. June 29th, financial crime and compliance, transforming text documents to graphs. We've got a number of things coming up that are likely to interest. We try and get people to give us abstracts for things that they are sometimes very cutting edge. Sometimes it's because it's new, but it's always interesting and always pretty technical in this forum. Next slide, sir. So the really important part of this is go and buy the merch. This was designed by our very own Abby Giles Haig, who's also one of my colleagues on the AnDOUC board. There's some great stuff there, and it will obviously look very good on your desk. We've encouraged our speakers today to have a go at them. So yeah. Next,
I'm going for a step away from the spreadsheet. I love that.
It's so to the point. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next slide, sir. So yeah, there's a lot of information and a lot of ways of connecting with us. You will see links in the chat that Carrie has very kindly put there for us. We've got the TecCast days, which we do generally quarterly. We have Slack channels for various aspects of the analytics and data across all of the Oracle product suite. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn. There's separate LinkedIn for spatial and graph. So there's lots of ways to connect with us. There's if you want to join us on Slack, you can join us right now. You'll find that in the chat box. But yeah, let's move to the next slide, sir. We have coming up in March next year. We had our first in-person conference back this year, which was really well attended and a great success. We're going to do it again in Redwood Shores next March. So please do save the date. There's a link on the website. You can actually register your intention to come ahead of time, and we'd be very grateful for it.
Yeah, I would really encourage people to do that, because that allows us to plan better. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, and we have a lot of top-notch people coming to talk, and we get a lot of good product direction directly from the horse's mouth when it comes to what's new and up and coming in Oracle. So yeah, Neil, you should be there.
I will.
And then yeah, I think there's just some very brief meeting logistics, and then I'll introduce you more formally to the team. The one thing to say is that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the session, at the end of the talking session, and please do put your questions in Q&A. Do not put them in the chat. You'll see there's a separate little icon for Q&A. If you put things in there, I will be watching that. And actually, we've got a secret squirrel, Peter Heller, in the background, also going to be helping us with Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let me introduce our two speakers today. So first of all, Lee Rosenfeld. He's an experienced solutions architect, and he's got expertise across multiple domains. He's obviously currently living the dream at McGraw Hill, and but he's skilled in Oracle database, including things like Exadata. Yeah, I don't want to say the word IBM, but there we are.
You don't need to say that.
But the most interesting thing about Lee, in my mind, is not any of his technical prowess, but the fact that he collects single cask bottlings of single malts from around the world. So he doesn't discriminate. It doesn't have to be Scottish, but he collects them. So I definitely want to become more friendly with Lee and actually have a visit to test drive some of those. So that's Lee, and Neil is someone that is really, he is part of the furniture. He's been around forever. He was actually one of the founders, if not the founder, really, of data warehousing and machine learning at Oracle. And he's been responsible for a large part of the development of those products over the years. He returned to Oracle in 2014 after a sojourn outside of the Oracle ecosystem, and now he is obviously back in the train doing his thing again. I think again the interesting aspect, a little interesting fact about him: Neil's a member of the Band of Angels, which is Silicon Valley's oldest seed funding angel organization. He's lived in 3 continents, actually so have I, and logged over 5 million miles managing global teams in India, Japan, France, the Netherlands. So basically, if there's a country you can think of, he's basically been there. But yeah, you'll find him either in Florida, just down the road from me, on an airplane, or in Boston. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, gentlemen. I hope you have some fun, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Great. Thanks very much, Roger. So I put a picture of the old me on here just for laughs and giggles, right? I mean, that was me as many years ago, right? Pre-COVID. And when I started data warehousing, I was a bit bigger person, right? But COVID allowed me to follow a data-driven journey. And I literally used data to shrink myself by more than 100 pounds. So anyway, that's my little thing. So pleasure to have Lee here, and let's get in a little bit. So we're going to talk about, McGraw Hill's modernizing their data strategy. And just a word about McGraw Hill. I mean, obviously, Lee can tell you fathoms, but for most of us, we remember McGraw Hill as being the publisher of books that we had from elementary school to junior high, middle school, and all the way through high school. In fact, how many of you remember, covering your books with either the brown paper, right, from the grocery store, or the comics? I was a brown paper guy because I could doodle, right? But McGraw Hill is so interesting because, they went from that model to the model that is today, right? Which is now, not only do they still produce books, but they produce online learning. They have a direct ties to their customers, which they never had before. So they're online, there are children logging in directly. So all of a sudden, Lee, you've got a much bigger job than, McGraw Hill historically, because it's a big change.
It's a massive change. It's a change not only in volume, but it's a massive change in technology.
Yeah.
We have customers who are using technologies that are non-traditional because they need to build new content rapidly to satisfy what is currently, evolving from a learning management perspective.
Yep.
And they are the traditional backbone of any organization like McGraw Hill is using legacy technologies. And the using legacy technologies required that we had to take a lot of shortcuts in order to take advantage of some of the new data sources. And as you know, taking shortcuts, while it might satisfy a short-term desire, creates long-term support issues.
So I want to get into those specific topics really in depth, because like one of the, I think that's really important here, at least for me, and I know it is in talking to Lee, is that we've been through these movies a number of different times, and to the extent that we can prevent any of you, right, from stepping into the same pothole or sticky gum as we have stepped in, we'd really like to do that. So thanks, Lee, for turning up. Before we get into the details with Lee, we're really going to talk about, of course, McGraw Hill's move, but it really is, a story together with Oracle and Informatica. So the folks at the user group asked me to just go through really quickly and just outline what it is that we're doing with Informatica, where did it come from really quickly, and then let's directly move on to Lee and really talk about the experiences. So look, go back historically, most of us and many of you, right, originally had an architecture that looked something like this, right? You're moving any kind of data source. Very, very popular back in the day when data warehousing was started. eBusiness Suite was big. PeopleSoft was big. JD Edwards, they weren't owned by Oracle, of course. You're going to use that to move data into your data warehouse. Informatica was, one of the key vendors that we had, right, when we first entered the data warehousing market. In fact, Informatica was one of the partners on the stage, right, when we announced it to the world at the International User Group in Philadelphia. Some of you may have been there. In fact, Dan was there, I know, because I remember. And then, of course, all that ended up to a series of BI tools, whether it be, Oracle really had a tool at that time called Discoverer, but that's since gone, but Tableau, Power BI, Cognos, and so forth. So this was the historical architecture. And frankly, as people were looking to the cloud, they were like, okay, we can get all this stuff on the right to the cloud, but Informatica is not an OCI. Right? Oracle and Informatica, while tremendous partners back in the day and recently, what are they doing to really help me today? Right? So this is where this thing really came from. So if you're not familiar with Informatica, one of the real interests for us, of course, was that, increasingly more and more as you listen to, our executives and so forth, we really are moving toward, the multi-cloud kind of an environment. So it becomes essential for our partners to be able to operate in a multi-cloud environment. It's not sufficient just to be able to operate exclusively within the Oracle Cloud. Nobody does that, right? You've got on-premises, you've got other third-party clouds and so forth, as Lee has, and he'll talk to that. So it's important as we think about this, that we're not talking about Oracle in and of itself, we're talking about Oracle that fits into a much larger ecosystem and how we're going to assist that. So I'm not in marketing, I'm in development. So I don't, many of these things have really been PowerPoint partnerships, which are frankly not worth much, right? This begins with an engineering partnership, right? We've come together, our various engineering organizations, right? Both from Informatica and the Oracle side. And Informatica and Oracle already had a lot of integration between its products, but not enough, right? So now what we have is Informatica is natively deployed on OCI, right? IDMC. They also, as Lee's going to talk about, they also can deploy on premises. This is very interesting. Lee's going to talk about that. But we've ongoing projects to make this a whole lot better with the database, right? Being able to take advantage of the new data types and be able to do lineage and impact analysis, not just on relational, but the other types as well, right? Golden Gate has historically had no ability to do data governance. We're integrating data governance, Informatica's data governance with our Golden Gate product. Look for more announcements with that. And for the first time, we're going to be able to govern Golden Gate, including MySQL, the object store, Oracle Analytics and Oracle applications. So across the board, we're really working at an engineering level to simplify this whole thing, right? Bringing the entire stack of Informatica into work together with the Oracle products, but not exclusively with the Oracle products, because, you know, as Lee does and others, you're going to have other sources and other targets on other clouds, and on premises. We fully expect that, right? And then we try to work on the commercial experience as well. So we now have the ability, if you choose, and you can do this in other clouds as well, is that if you have unused Oracle Cloud credits, or you have cloud credits as well, then you can actually flow or Informatica services through Oracle and use your universal credits, right? We also will provide you with implementation services. I wish we had that fully available when Lee started his adventure.
You're not the only one.
Exactly. We've got available now, and those come from Oracle, they come from Informatica, but also many customers decide, you know, the leadership is going to come from a GSI. So whether you decide to do this journey through with us, by yourself, with a GSI, we're there to help you both with lowering your costs and lowering your risks. Okay, enough about this. All right, so, you know, architecturally, it'll end up looking like this, but I really want, you know, to get into what Lee's looks at. So, you know, finally, with this, just to close it off, you know, it was interesting that the analyst community is really coming to life again as it relates to Oracle. You may have seen this week, Oracle stock has really gone way up because, you know, we're really back, if you will, right, into the fold. So let's get into the conversation with Lee. So Lee, we started to talk about this, but how did you begin this journey, and why did you begin this journey? Was this something that you said, we've got to do it, so I'm going to take my mandate and go forward? How did this begin?
I got a phone call and said, we have to leave the data center, start planning. Literally. But
it wasn't an if, it wasn't advice. It was like, we've already made the decision.
The decision had already been made, and the first thing I had to do was prove that it was technically feasible, because even to this day, we have naysayers who do not believe that we can achieve on-prem like performance in the cloud. And, you know, so before we even began the project, I had to stand up a POC environment and first measure what my current on-prem throughput was. 1.25 terabytes an hour was my peak. And then I had to simulate that in OCI, which we did. And I stopped when I hit 1.5 terabytes an hour because I already exceeded it by my margin, and there was no point in continuing the work. So once we were able to prove that the throughput was physically possible, then we went ahead with the decision to move over.
Yeah, and I found this interesting. In fact, Lee shared that your ETL on-prem was primarily taking place on a supercluster, right?
It's all on a supercluster.
All on a supercluster.
Which I find to be very bad, because when you have unlimited capacity, people do not pay attention to efficiency. Efficiency only becomes a problem when the resources are no longer available. So working on the supercluster has led to a lot of very bad behavior because they didn't have to do good design because the supercluster took care of it behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the really important lessons learned, because in the on-prem world, Lee, you had to configure your supercluster for the peak load, right? And most of the time it wasn't there, but you had to configure for the peak load, right? The difference, of course, is if you take, if you will, that inefficiency and you bring it to the cloud, you pay for what you use.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden, potentially, right, where you paid for the supercluster as a sunk cost, right? And the fact that it's running, if you will, inefficient scripts, right? That's masked over by the fact you already paid for it, it's a sunk cost, and you've got the power. But when you move that to the cloud, holy crap, it could end up costing a fortune, right? So Lee, what did you decide to do? Did you do a lift and shift?
No, we did not. The problem with doing a lift and shift is I'm basically taking code which I do not find to be palatable and porting it and moving it into a new platform. My preference would be to refactor and rebuild an IICS following Informatica's best practices and standards. I've been an adherent of the velocity methodology now for well over 20 years, primarily because of its focus on metadata purity. When one is dealing with very large scale applications or systems rather, because it's not really an application, we're talking about a very large ecosystem of interconnected applications. I kind of need that level of transparency into the data that is moving from point A to point B and all the hops that it takes along the way. And that is not possible. That would not have been possible with a lift and shift.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest issues that we were attempting to solve was a support issue, is that when a job failed, it required skilled engineers to go in and figure out what the job was doing because of the heavy parameterization that had been done, which invalidated all the metadata in Power Center that had been done. So I could not go into any mapping and find out, okay, what database is it connecting to? Can't tell. I have to go into the session log to find out. What's the SQL statement that it's running? Can't tell from the Power Center because it's using a parameter for part of the predicate. So all of these different small things that developers had done over the years resulted in a very large system that was expensive to maintain and had a very long time to market for enhancements and bug fixes.
One of the things that you brought out that I thought was really, so fascinating with this is that, clearly, when this system was designed back when, you had a completely different business model, right? You didn't have any personally identifiable information, certainly not on children, right? Sold through distributors, books, and so forth. Now it's a completely different game, right? And one of the things that you talked about was, and we all remember historically, when most of these systems, Gen 1 and Gen 2, and interesting enough, even when big data began, a lot of people began not with declarative UI, but writing code, right? And today, you talk to anybody, they're like, hey, I can whip out a transformation in Python, right, really quick. But Lee, you had some interesting comments. What's wrong with writing code for ETL? Whether it's SQL or PL SQL or Python or anything.
Right, either SQL statements, PL SQL statements, Python, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. It's really about the transparency and the traceability needed to support the application. I am not yes, I've been a developer, but I've also been in support. And being able to keep the lights on is far more important than small new enhancements. I can't keep the lights on if my jobs fail and I don't know immediately what the root cause was. I need to have that level of traceability so that I can find where the issues occur. I can't find an issue if it is embedded deep down within a store proc.
Yeah, which is
I can't find an issue if it's in a Python script. And if I am required from my auditors to be able to show traceability back to my source, if I need to answer the question, where did this metric come from on this report? I should be able to easily find that without having to create a project, which is kind of what we have to do.
Yeah. And, again, I thought this was just, again, so interesting because as you talked about it, having this code base rather than procedurally defined, right, means that, as you said, your ability to make it manageable over time and your ability, once a problem occurs or to enhance it, is really, you may get an initial advantage up front, but you pay for it down the line. Right?
That's correct.
And then the other point that we're going to talk about in a little bit is the whole business about governance. And you were really clear that, we need, exactly as you said, that observability. And when it goes into code, it goes into a black box and then I'm lost.
Well, it's not only that, I don't necessarily expect all of my developers, for my technology partners, to fully understand what the privacy regulations are. That's not their job. Mm-hmm. So a developer is not going to be as adherent to privacy policies as an auditor, or at least somebody who has to talk to the auditor, which is me.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's probably you.
Yeah. So when it comes to anything that approaches audits, you need that traceability and the transparency.
One of the other things that you talked about when we were talking was this whole Lego approach, that as you went to do it again, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
I love Legos. I bought recently a new Lego kit. We all love Legos, but what does it mean from your perspective?
From a building perspective, the Lego approach really does go back multiple decades. to modular coding or object-oriented coding. But the whole concept is you want to build small maplets or mappings or processes that build once, test, harden, and then use to build additional more complex processes. So, we have a common process that we use to record file movement because we have an audit requirement to keep track of every financial file that comes within our system from point of entry to point of exit. And the easiest way for managing that is through the use of basically building common code that can be accessed from anywhere versus the traditional ETL approach, which they attempted to start but was immediately negated, was every single mapping was going to do the exact same thing and put the exact same code in it, which ends up becoming a maintenance nightmare.
Yeah, I remember you talk about this giant block of code that essentially had, all these conditional clauses, right? And then when a problem went, you may have had, 50 different I'm just making up stuff, clauses. And then when a problem goes wrong, you've got to weed through all that code that has nothing to do with your problem. It has to do with other things, right?
Yes.
So you're just taking the tried and true approach, breaking it up into its modules, using maplets as a concept so that you can continue to have your maintainability and your observability at the same time.
Now, we do recognize that there are going to be exceptions, and we have a very rigid exception documentation process, which follows the open group architectural decision. So as long as you can create a valid reason why one can't follow, we maintain a repository of approved exceptions that is available to our support team so that they will know when something is non-standard, what it is, why it is the way it is, and and more importantly, who they can contact for support. Because if it's not embedded within IICS, it's not their responsibility. And it's, this really ties into the transparency component, because if I don't want them to try to dig into something that has an exception. And the reason it has an exception is because it was too complex to put into IICS at this point in time. And I have to add the qualifier of at this point in time, because we are on an evolving platform. And I have seen quite a few shifts in IICS since we started our journey a little more than 2 years ago.
Yeah. You also mentioned that, as part of your business, as many businesses do, you of course have your own employees, but you also have a lot of contractors, right? And you talked about, where when this was all built, the contractor was essentially contracted to essentially do X number of transformations from A to B, right? And the standards in between, they were intended to deliver that outcome, and how they delivered it wasn't really monitored. So talk about the standards and running your business with not only employees, but contractors. You must have had some standards originally, but what's different about these now?
When I joined McGraw Hill a few years ago, the standards for PowerCenter that we had on our network share drive was about a sentence, and it literally said that use PowerCenter as your platform for executing complex SQL and stored procedures.
Okay.
So
but
that was the baseline for about 20 years worth of development over 10 repositories. So that's my starting point, is use PowerCenter as a mechanism for running complex SQL and stored procedures. I'm a big believer in, as I mentioned before, the velocity methodology and metadata purity. When I joined McGraw Hill, the first thing we did is we brought in a static code analyzer for PowerCenter, and I implemented the velocity methodology. And lo and behold, my developers, which were TCS, but that's irrelevant. We're a managed service company. So my technology partners are my technology partners. It doesn't really matter where they're from. I rely on them for the work. They had no problems conforming to standard. And in some cases, we actually improved the development time, because when one is not coding things manually and you're going through the point and click within PowerCenter, it just goes faster because there's less that you're actually doing. So those converted relatively smoothly to IDMC because they already were relatively compliant with standards.
Yep. In fact,
It's
that kind of-
everything else that like the thousands of mappings that I had. I mean, our first major migration, I mean, a really big major migration was for Oracle Financials from on-prem into SaaS. And that does have thousands of mappings and flows.
So I skipped over that slide. So you have EBS, right? Complicated EBS on premises, but also some of it
Heavily customized. Let's not forget the heavy customization.
No, that's it. That's the nature of EBS. Right. So those very complex mappings with EBS, along with other data sources that have to be merged as well. And you said ultimately it's not thousands of mappings, but tens of thousands.
Eventually it will be when we're done, because in order to help provide the transparency, eliminating parameterized flows, it makes a big difference, because it'll take what traditionally would have been one complicated flow with a lot of parameters.
Yep.
That I'm sending critical files to our banks around the world, all of a sudden now becomes one flow per bank per location.
Which is clearly much easier to debug.
Well, it's much easier from a transparency perspective to see. Now, the number of jobs being executed doesn't really change. The number of assets I have to maintain doesn't necessarily change, because the mappings being executed by the flows are common. So common logic can be used, again, the Lego approach, across multiple flows.
Yeah. Now you use the Informatica migration factory for some of this migration. And again, just repeating on the point that you didn't just do a lift and shift to take everything, convert it and move it up, right? Because again, performance, the SLA, reliability, and all these things, but there were a bunch of mappings that you just wanted to just have them take care of. How did that work out?
Some task flows that had a combination of the financials, which were in scope, and non-financials, which were out of scope. But I was not going to split a workflow into part IICS task flow and then continue the rest in Power Center, because that would have become a nightmare from readjusting our batch schedule. Yep. So I wanted to migrate the entire flow to IICS or IDMC. And that required us to bring in the migration factory to assist, because the Wipro, who is our technology partner for the implementation of financials and SaaS, didn't have that within their scope. The only thing within their scope was anything that touched financials, nothing adjacent.
Oh, so it was kind of like, you got to deal with that.
We brought in, and they were still responsible for the overall task flow, even though the components being executed were created by the migration factory. Now, we did not follow the alternate path of migration factory of just doing a lift and shift, because that would have, while it would have given us executable code, it would not have been easily modifiable.
Right.
So we actually had the migration factory re-implement as is in IICS for us. And that enabled us to then take that code and merge it with the work being done by Wipro.
Did you have to do this all alone, or did Informatica lean in?
No, Informatica leaned in.
Yeah, because I think that's an important part, is that, having, these migration factories, which we of course have for Oracle and so forth. And as we look conceptually now to move these things, if we go back to that original picture, our goal is not to migrate your data warehouse, right? Our goal is to migrate your business, right? Whatever that might be, right? And that means that a database alone is not enough, right? What about, the ETL tool? That's the part with Informatica, the database, the transmission, those things. How do you add important things like governance? What about your BI tool, right? How do I move that stuff? Classically, and maybe you could talk about that as well, is that, historically, it's been easier to migrate BI tools than ETL tools. Did you see that in your practice here, that, without a migration tool, it was going to be 100% manual effort?
Well, okay, for us, it's really not a good comparison, because I rebuilt everything.
Okay.
But if we had good on-prem code, then it would not have been as large an effort to rebuild it in the cloud.
Right. And I thought that was interesting as well, because, again, back to what you mentioned before, is that, you had an inkling that it was not necessarily efficient, not non-compliant from a governance point of view is a different thing. But the concern about, and especially coming from within, which says, hey, we got this super powerful computer, I'm not convinced that the cloud can do it. But what you recognize, which I think is really important, is that in the cloud, you're going to get charged differently than you do on premises. And if you move that inefficiency to the cloud, right, well, then holy shit, you're not taking advantage, right, of the whole dynamic scaling that you can get through autonomous and other mechanisms. You're paying too much.
Yes, and in the cloud, if you should only provision what you need. As we are deploying more repositories and increasing the number of flows that we are running in production, we are growing our production environment. And growing the production environment is a relatively trivial task in OCI.
But you're growing that based upon business need, not just based upon, let's just move all of our data.
And now we are also growing based a little bit on fear and superstition. So I do have more servers than I really need, but due to the relative low cost of the servers, it's worth the ease, the peace of mind for senior management to have more than we need, because it's always better to have more than you need than need more than you have.
Yeah, and more and more, all companies are trying to simplify this stuff. Like, one of the things that I thought was really annoying, for example, was, like, one of the decisions people make is, am I going to put data in an object store? Am I going to put data in a database, right? And one of the fundamental drivers for that was putting data in the object store was much cheaper, right? Much less expensive than putting data in, let's say, a database like Autonomous, right? One of the things that happened recently is like, wait a minute, this is kind of stupid, right? Why are we forcing customers to make this from a financial point of view? Why don't we just make them the same, right? So we kind of obliterated this. It's like, you ought to be able to make these decisions based upon technical merit and SLAs and take cost out of the equation, right? By making the cost of database storage equal to that of object store. That doesn't mean you should put all your data in the database. It simply means you won't pay a penalty from a cost point of view in doing so.
Right. We are planning on taking full advantage of the object store, because one of the features the object stores provide us is the ability to put files in there for archive purpose and declare them as immutable. So, which auditors really like, because now my files are safe and they cannot be deleted or changed until expired.
And the process flow that you describe is one that is observable and can be governed, right? All the way down to, right, where did this come from?
Well, that's why I do have that requirement to track files from point of entry to point of exit, even if that point of exit is the archival. And, and IDMC does provide the capability of reporting on every file that it moves when it does a SFTP.
Yeah.
So it's very simple to take the output of a file transmission task and pump the data directly into your audit tables. Yeah. No scripting necessary.
So let's turn to lineage. Let's turn to governance just for a minute, because I know you had said a number of your decision making was really done, some of it was based upon, again, observability and so forth. So where are you on the governance side? I mean, the things that you've already moved through the migration utility and through things that you've moved yourself, are you able now, for those transformations, are you able now to see, right? Can you now
we can see, but my data governance team is also undergoing part of a transformation, because they were also running on-prem and are now migrating into IDMC.
Oh,
so
what were they running on-prem? Was it custom built? Or?
No, we use IDQ.
Okay.
So we've got Informatica data quality for on-prem. We use Axon Business Glossary, and we used Enterprise Data Catalog. And now we're just migrating everything up into cloud data governance.
Makes sense, because the migration utility, I think, I'm sometimes guilty of this. You think of you think of companies the way they are when you first encountered them. Oracle is a database company because that's when I first encountered Oracle. That's what Oracle is, right? Doesn't mean it didn't change. I think of it that way. And too many people, I think of Informatica as like an ETL company. It's like, yeah, that's part of it, but increasingly it's a much bigger part of what is necessary.
It's more about data management than than ETL, because you need to have that governance on top of the ETL. And they're really interlinked.
Right. So maybe it'd be worthwhile to just pause for a minute. And I'm sure people are wondering,
in that pause, you've had 40 minutes so far, Neil, just to give you track of time.
Cool. I just wanted to answer a question that a lot of people have, which is, hang on, what's going on here, right? Oracle has ETL, Oracle has a data catalog. What is this, right? Well, I think the reality of it is that, hearkening back to the beginning, look, these systems by definition are increasingly multi-cloud and multi-platform, and that's not changing, right? The ability for customers to be able to pick and choose is fundamentally important. And frankly, we needed to be able to provide things like data governance over our entire stack, and not just over the Oracle stack, because Lee, you didn't want data governance over Oracle, you wanted data governance for McGraw Hill.
Yes.
Which meant that you needed something that ran on-prem, multiple clouds, including that of Oracle, to handle that. So,
and non-traditional data sources as well.
Non-traditional data sources, right? So our partnership with Informatica is really both customer driven in a very, very big way, because so many customers have joined together many years ago, still have this issue. It's our responsibility to try to help move them forward, right? At the same time. So where do you think, so ultimately, do you think that a lot of your decisions over time will end up having to be made through the lens of governance, as compared to, like before it was like, get the data available as fast as you can in whatever form you can to the business users? Is that changing now?
Governance is becoming a greater and greater need. Well, it's because look what's going on out in the industry.
Yeah.
There are lawsuits that our companies are now losing. You've got governments around the world imposing stricter and stricter privacy standards. It's very difficult for developers to understand how to stay current. I mean, our data governance team is not part of IT. They're separate.
Where are they organizationally? Are
they roll up into finance, part of the CFO organization. Yep. And that's quite common, actually. My prior employer, it was the same.
Yeah.
Because the financial people tend to have a tendency to want to have good, clean, reportable, auditable data.
Yeah.
So,
well, they've always been under regulatory control from an accounting point of view. It's the regulatory control now that's being added, if you will, related to personally identifiable information and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
And being able to identify personally identifiable information is one of the values that we get with IDMC as it scans data. So we can take advantage of the capabilities that come with the data governance tools and the scanners to find information that we should be protecting that we didn't know we were supposed to.
Okay. So,
because our vendors have to tell us what the data is. And that circles back to something we discussed earlier about the overrides. When you're dealing with privacy, you really need to have full view into your source systems so that you know that you're adhering to government regulations. If you have overrides or hidden code that you can't introspect, you could unintentionally be violating a governmental regulation and putting your business at risk.
Yeah. And that's probably the worst thing. It's like, it's one thing if it's the unintentional action, right? It's like, I didn't mean to do that, but, you're responsible nonetheless. So it was just kind of an interesting slide that somebody shared with me in terms of, just how multi-cloud everything is and how data governance and data locality are becoming so important, right? Which was interesting as well, because, part of what was interesting to us is as we move customers forward to the cloud, we know that they won't exit the data center in one fell swoop. So we needed a way to be able to have these agents running both on premises in the Oracle Cloud, also Oracle Cloud at Customer. So these agents work both with Cloud at Customer as well, and they also work right in the private regions as well. So that flexibility was important. So Lee, I want to move into Q&A, but before I do that, answer the question for us. How can vendors help from your perspective? What relationships should people strive to have, and how are we doing? Give us a grade.
The relationship, well, okay, first of all, I don't like to use the word vendor.
Okay.
Vendor, has a certain connotation that doesn't come into play in the type of relationships that we build. We have technology partners.
Okay.
We can't do this on our own. I could not have implemented what we had implemented without assistance from both Oracle and Informatica. It's not doable. These platforms are constantly evolving. Things change with each release. So I know IDMC has 3 major releases a year and almost a monthly update plus patching.
Mm-hmm.
With that amount of volatility, you cannot stay on top of everything that is coming down the pipe. The only way that you can be successful is if you build close working relationships with your technology partners so they can assist you when you run into issues, partially, as a result of your lack of knowledge of changes.
And just to kind of bring to light one of the changes that Oracle had to make, many companies had to make during their transition to the cloud, but I think particularly important to Oracle is that, as you said, a vendor will celebrate the success when they get a deal. Woohoo, we closed the deal, right? But from a customer's point of view, that is by no means the definition of success, right? And in the cloud, right? Remember, the cloud is based on renewals. So we had to change not only our definition of success, but how we pay people. So people say, well, wait a minute, does Oracle really want to spend all this money to help us get to the cloud? And the answer is, you betcha. The reason is because at the end of the day, we pay our people not on booking a deal, but rather on whether the customer consumes it or not. So it's our responsibility together with our partners, both customer partners and vendor partners, if you will, right, to smooth that process, because at the end of the day, it not only benefits the customer, but it's the only way we can do business, right? We can't do business basically saying bye-bye, on the booking. We have to stay in there. So more and more of our resources are being devoted, right, increasingly to not before the sale, it's after, right? That's the part that's really important, right? So there are lots of different projects going on that are going on between us. I think I'll just skip through that, and let's see if we can't. Oh, that didn't work. This is just different examples. This one is a mid-range bank. Another one is a government agency. My only point is that, look, to Lee's point, nobody wants to go first. Lee went early. There's a lot more help available for you now, and there's a lot of people that are going before you. So, if you feel like you're going to be a pioneer by doing what Lee did, when Lee did it at the time, yep, pioneering, and in some cases still, right? But we've gotten beyond that point. And I would also add that, again, we're very, very motivated to make this work. So if you have changes or suggestions, we want to hear those too. So, in summary, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Neil, I was just going to interject. I know you've had to flip through some slides, but just to tell the audience that this deck will be archived along with the recording. So you will be able to go and look at those cases. And if you have questions outside of this, please do refer them to us or to, obviously, to Neil or Lee directly. But we're quite happy to filter those through as needed.
Are there any questions on the line that people have that we might address?
Well, our secret squirrel, Peter, has been answering loads of them. There's been 8 answered. In fact, it seems between him and anonymous attendee, Mr. Anonymous, have really sort of taken up the chat. But I don't know if you wanted to just quickly scan those, and if there's any additional comments you would like to make, feel free. That might be something to do. But otherwise, don't let me interrupt your flow any more than I already have.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Again, the takeaways are pretty clear, right? In terms of Lee's motivation was his company decided we're moving to the cloud. So he had to get in line and he had to make that happen, right? That's happening across the board. One of the things that's happening as well is, of course, is that, AI has just exploded, right? And every executive, right, is reading articles, right? And eventually it comes down to people like ourselves, Lee, and they say, okay, AI is going to change the world. We need it tomorrow, right? So my point here is that, if you've been following any of the large language model stuffs and so forth, maybe you saw Oracle's earnings report this month. We're doing a tremendous amount in this area. And our real mission here is, if you can get your data, right, in a place, as Lee says, that's reliable, that's based on standards, that's the basis on which you do AI upon, right? How would you do the AI, that we're being asked to do in your previous on-prem implementation? Would that have been possible, Lee?
Yeah, because how do you analyze if you can't guarantee quality?
Right. And then the result that you get, how do you actually say, that this result was based upon facts and not beliefs, or, as you say, something that was an unintended consequence, right, that ended up coming out, right?
Yeah, that's the problem.
So I just want to go to this and say, there are lots of things available to help you. The migration utility that Lee referred to, Informatica recently made that available directly. So at one point you needed to contact them directly to get it. Now they're making it downloadable. I would still suggest that, hey, if you want to get started, download that, take a look. We've got a live lab available on Oracle where you can literally go ahead and yourself work with IDMC, doing movement from data on premises and so forth, so you can try all that stuff out. There's no cost to that. Of course, you can contact your respective salespeople, go to our respective things and the like, and get yourself up to speed in terms of what we're doing. And again, I just like to encourage people as a whole, which says, don't hesitate, right? It is that, at one point or another, your company is going to come to you, if they haven't already, and ask for the same kinds of things that Lee is embarked on right now, right? And I think one of the really interesting things up until this point is that, a lot of what we've done to date, right, is really a precursor to perhaps the changes to this entire architecture of data warehousing and data lakes and data modeling and analytics as AI becomes a bigger and bigger part of what we do, right? So having that resilience that Lee described and treating vendors like partners, right, only works if the vendor sees themselves as a partner, right? And I would argue that it can't work unless the vendor pays its people to be a partner, because, hey, we do what we're supposed to, what we're told, and we do what we're paid to do, right? So you're going to get these things for you. So just kind of like, I was thinking, if you wanted to go back and revisit some of those things, right?
We are on first name basis with quite a few of the support people.
Yeah. So go get your hands-on lab, get your, we got the database migrations to be able to help you with that. We've got the live labs, we've got the migration tools. For example, if you're a giant Golden Gate user, as an example, right, and you're really interested in governing Golden Gate, we're working on this right now. If you want to participate with us in terms of helping us, in terms of specifications, minimum viable product, you want to get involved with any of these things, let us know. Because, again, we're not involved in esoteric computer science projects. No, this is all about how we help companies move forward and pick up the responsibility that we have, not only as individual vendors, right, but across the vendor community to make it easier, right? And we're not only doing this with Informatica, I think you're seeing this with Microsoft, right? I personally, as a longtime person in this industry, I'm delighted to see again, collaborations between these really, really big vendors, because at the end of the day, multi-cloud is only real if the cloud vendors physically connect to each other, right? And eliminate and provide a high-speed interconnect between and eliminate the egress costs, right? Until we've done that, and that's what Oracle and Microsoft have done, right? It makes multi-cloud very difficult. difficult from an implementation point of view and difficult from a cost point of view, right? So Lee, any other words of advice that you might give people,
Don't live in the past. Don't let fear and superstition rule what you're doing. The laws of physics still apply in the cloud, actually are even more important in the cloud than they were on-prem, because now we have distance. And partner, and really partner with your technology partners, because they can only help you. And because that is their only goal, is to make you successful. So why would you not want to take advantage of that help?
Yeah, I would agree. And again, more details, happy to do another session if y'all wish, and really take a drill down on step-by-step looking at the migration utilities that both Oracle and Informatica provide as a step-by-step function. You can do that through the live lab. We're happy to meet with you on WebEx or other forum. And we're here to help, right? At the end of the day, right? We're a business, as Lee's in business as well, but our business these days is to satisfy customers' requirements, because in the cloud model, that's the only way you retain a customer, right? So,
great,
Roger, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always refreshing to hear what's actually happening on the ground. And Lee, I was very grateful to hear your, if you like, unfiltered commentary in well, reasonably unfiltered. So thank you. Yeah, Neil, always a pleasure. So just a reminder to everybody, this will be posted hopefully within about a week. This recording and the deck will be posted. If you do have further questions, please feel free to, a good place to do that would be to go to the Slack channel if you've not already registered, and put your questions there, and we can actually filter through and distribute questions as needed if you put things there for us. So without further ado, thank you so much for your contributions, gents. And maybe what we do is do a series and bite off some bite-sized chunks that we can develop. So maybe we'll talk about that sort of an abstract after this, maybe. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Lee.